What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? On today's episode of Steelers Touching Under in our War Room series that puts you in the minds of Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, Andy Weidel as they put together a winning roster in 2024 and beyond. We are talking about centers. We are talking about Jackson Powers-Johnson particularly, and looking at the other centers that are worthy potentially of a first-round pick or a second-round pick, certainly day one, day two. Is he the best prospect on the board right now? A lot of people have him consensus best prospect. There's a lot of school of thought out there that says the center is not worth a top 25 pick. There's a lot of school of thought out there that says actually no, that if you need a center and they're going to provide you value, they're going to get you over the hump, then they are worthy of that pick. Creed Humphreys proved that. He was drafted in the 50s in the second round in his draft. Tyler Linderbaum was drafted as a mid-round guy, of the first in like 15, 16, 17, 18 in that sort of range. I think it was a 15th or 16th pick off the top of my head with the Ravens. And we've seen other centers move all in different roundabouts. But what does that mean for Jackson Powers-Johnson? There are two teams right now that could be in on him in those mid-rounds. The 16th and 17th pick are Seattle, Jacksonville, LA could be in there as well. They all need a center help. So Jackson Powers-Johnson, that's where he could fall. But a lot of people are saying the Pittsburgh Steelers should draft him if he's there at 20. Then it's about how do you get Frazier if you don't get Jackson Powers-Johnson. And then there's, of course, Cedric Van Pran, who's really tall, really athletic, played at Georgia. But some people are concerned about his arm length, which is the same as Frazier's, even though Frazier's a bit shorter than him. There's all these different variables. Frazier's probably worth like at the maximum back end of the first. He's the 37th best prospect on Daniel Jeremiah's latest top 50, which is his 4.0, I think. Jackson Powers-Johnson is the 30th best player on that board. So they're definitely the top two centers, but I actually don't think Van Pran's too far behind them. But there's also two other guys, I've got a control of a late round pick. And we've also got Graham Barton, who played tackle mostly at Duke in college, but was projected to play interior, particularly guard in the NFL when he switched. He was considered the best guard prospect. And now he's done workouts at center. And so I think it was really cool if we assess all these five guys. So I've put together a quick list of these guys. Now, all the stats in front of me that you can see right now are essentially from PFF. As I mentioned on our last video that we did, the thing about PFF is that it does blocking grades for college linemen that no other platform does. So you might hate the grades and what have you, but I've actually put some NFL data in here as well from NFL.com. So we're going to look at all of that together and find out who is actually the best center prospect in this NFL draft. And my conclusion that I'm going to give you is going to upset some people. I know it's going to upset a few people that are Steel fans, that are regular subs of this channel, that are regular listeners. If you're not a sub yet, please consider hitting that sub button. We are on a race to 500 before the draft. That will allow us to do things during the draft that we can't do if we're not 500. But we're still going to have awesome content if we don't hit that 500 mark. All right. Now, the position on the board right now, we've got Graham Barton, Matt Lee out of Miami, who the Steelers have had visits with before. He's considered a 5th to a 7th round pick by a lot of people. Max ceiling a 4th, but really a 5th. Cedric Van Pran Granger, Jackson Powers-Johnson, and obviously Zach Frazier. So Graham Barton out of Duke, Matt Lee out of Miami, Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia, Jackson Powers-Johnson out of Oregon, and Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. Shannon White, Mike Steelers Global Perspective host, is favorite player in this draft, I think. And if not, then I can't wait to hear the PR story about who else he's going to pick up. But, and we all have our draft crushes, so I got mine too. I think I kind of got a new one after in terms of the center prospect as well. But if we look at the NFL.com rating, overall, the best prospect actually is a 6.46 in Graham Barton. Closest to that is Jackson Powers-Johnson. Cedric Van Pran Granger is pretty close. Zach Frazier is a little bit behind them. And then Matt Lee is the worst. That's why he's in red. Combine rank. So they ranked all of them at center. Now, interestingly, Graham Barton received a center rank at the Combine from Next Gen Stats. And if you look at his overall Combine performance according to Next Gen Stats, he's number 1. Number 2 is Jackson Powers-Johnson. Number 3 is Zach Frazier. And number 7 is Cedric Van Pran. He didn't have a great Combine. Not great. If you look at sacks conceded in college, I've got 2 numbers here for you. What's in brackets, for those that you can see it, is the sacks they had last year. I'm going to read them all out for those listening on the audio side or have a small screen, or if you're watching on mobile. So Graham Barton had 10 sacks overall in his college career. He had 2 last year, 2 the year before, And then he had 6 the year before that. But remember, he's played a lot of tackle, and I'll explain the breakdown of the snaps for all these players shortly. Matt Lee has allowed 4 sacks, but none last year. Cedric Van Pran Granger allowed only 1 in his whole career. He now allowed none last year. Jackson Powers-Johnson allowed none last year. Zach Frazier allowed none last year. But Zach Frazier's allowed 5 so far in his his college football career. You look at snaps total, though. Jackson Powers-Johnson, who most people have got this as the top pick, has played the least amount of snaps. In fact, the closest person to him is Graham Barton, and Graham Barton has almost played double the amount of snaps. Really, really small sample size, and he's not the best snapper of the football either in Jackson Powers-Johnson. Now, if I was to go down, I didn't want to do this, but if I was to go in terms of the blocking grades as well, if you go Graham Barton, he had an overall blocking grade last year of 78.2 pass blocking grade. Matt Lee had an 89.1, one of the best in all of the centers. Jackson Powers-Johnson a 90.6, Zach Frazier a 77.9, and Cedric Van Pran had an 81.5. So Graham Barton and Jackson Powers-Johnson were the lead up there. But people don't like PFF grades, so it is what it is. I'm not the biggest fan of them either, but I do like all the other stats that they accumulate for the linemen. Right, look at quarterback hits allowed, 14 for Zach Frazier over the course of his college career, only 1 for Cedric Van Pran, only 1 for Jackson Powers-Johnson. Now, Cedric Van Pran has played in a very good O-line at Georgia. We know that from drafting Broderick Jones. We know that because Amaris Mims is considered another top pick, a potential Steelers pick at number 20. Matt Lee's allowed 7, and Graham Barton's allowed 8. And remember, he's played a lot of his college career at tackle. When you look at pressures, I've got 2 guys listed here in red for the worst, and that's Graham Barton and Zach Frazier. The reason why I've done 2 is Zach Frazier's only 2 away, but Zach Frazier's played the predominant part of his career at center versus Graham Barton, who's seen more traffic from edge rushers at the left tackle position. You look at penalties, Graham Barton is the most penalized player on this list, followed by Matt Lee. Cedric Van Pran Granger and Jackson Powers-Johnson both have 14 each, and Zach Frazier has 17. We actually go back last year, and Jackson Powers-Johnson had like 9 penalties, so pretty concerning there, whereas Zach Frazier, I think, only had 5. I think Cedric Van Pran Granger, only had 1, but we've got a lot of stats to go through, so I'm not going to pull that all up. I'm just remembering that off the top of my head. But I did want to go into their snaps per position. So if you look at this, the player that's played the least amount of snaps at center is, in fact, Graham Barton. No surprise. He's played a lot of left tackle. A lot of people talked about him kicking inside. A lot of people talked about the changes at Duke. That's the right reason why I played at center. But he played 430 snaps at center. We're actually going to dive into those after I give you all the snap breakdown, because there's some interesting stats there that I want to show you, particularly with Graham Barton. Then you look at Matt Lee. He's played 3,488 snaps at center. That's more than anyone else has played total snaps anywhere else, including Zach Frazier, and he's played 70 at left guard. So he's pretty much played a game and a half at left guard. When you look at Cedric Van Pran Granger, he's played 2,746 snaps at center. Jackson Powers-Johnson has played 893 at center, 430 at guard, 27 at left guard. The 430 was at right guard and 5 at right tackle. Now, a couple of these guys have played less than a handful of snaps as inline tight end, but it was less than a handful across a couple of players, so I chose not to list that out for you. And then if you look at Zach Frazier, he's had 2,667 snaps at center and 542 at left guard. So he's kind of on a ratio there of like, he's sort of played 83% of his snaps roughly off the top of my head with my quick maths at 5'6". At center. So again, probably one of the more experienced centers guys on this list, along with Van Pran Granger, and of course Matt Lee, who's played a bunch of snaps there, but is a later round prospect. But let's double click on Graham Barton, because Graham Barton, as I mentioned, has played a lot of his career at left tackle. But what about the year that he actually played center? Because if we're going to compare apples with apples, because he's the biggest difference. He actually started out his college career at center. And in that year, he had all those 430 snaps at center in college were in that first year in 2020. Now, that year as well, I think they were, obviously it was a COVID year, they were affected. I don't think they played, I can pull it up, but I think they only played 8 games, if I'm correct in thinking from Duke. I think they only played No, they played less than that. Yeah, they played six games. So that's all he got to play with those 430 snaps. However, he only allowed 4 quarterback hits, 5 quarterback hurries, 9 pressures, and had 5 penalties. No sacks. Key thing, no sacks, right? Everyone else, apart from Jackson Powers Johnson, who has played a bit of guard, everyone else has allowed at least 1 sack in their college career. So Graham Barton does have some snaps there. And actually, when you go back and you look at it, he has got half the snaps at center, Graham Barton, and he's played left tackle, which is arguably harder once you take 7 the football away from a pass blocking perspective. He's played almost half the snaps that Jackson Powers Johnson has played at center. So Graham Barton, actually, to me, when I look at it, is potentially one of the, not just the best O-lineman prospects in this draft, but because he's been interior, he's jumped down on the list. But he could arguably be the best center. And that's going to shock some people. You're going to be like, Matty, he doesn't slap the ball regularly. He, has had an easier going college because he's a tackle and not had to deal with interior pressure. It's a big task for him to go to the pros. But think about it. If this guy can play at center, this guy can play at guard, which is what he was projected to play. And this guy comes out of college playing mostly left tackle, right? And I can go through his statistics as a tackle, and he's pretty up there. When I did my tackle show yesterday, I mentioned Graham Barton at different times in there because of where he was ranked, right? He's top 20 in a lot of categories, right? Top 20 tackle prospect. Just on PFF grades alone, not even performance. But if he can play literally all 5 positions, does that make him a better value prospect than Jackson Powers Johnson? Because right now, Jackson Powers Johnson seems to be the consensus number 1. The guy has snap issues. He's falling down boards. He's only played 1,355 snaps. Zach Frazier, it's a reach to grab him out earlier than pick 30, right? But he might get pushed up purely because of Jackson Powers Johnson and the hype around him. But if Jackson Powers Johnson is there at 20, and so is Graham Barton, and the Steelers don't have Fuago or Maris Mims on the board, and I think Barton has more versatility, to be honest, than Fatanu. I don't like the idea of Fatanu at center, even though he's tested there. Maybe Graham Barton's the pick. But you let me know in the comments, do you think Graham Barton is actually worthy of the best interior offensive lineman pick and actually a safer pick with more value than Jackson Powers Johnson, a guy that can play at least 3, if not all 5 positions on the line? Because I'm starting to head there, guys. I'm starting to head there myself. You let me know in the comments, or as well, if you're just still on the Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier train. Again, realistically, I do think the Steelers will go tackle or corner in the first round and then go get Zach Frazier, trade up in the second. But you could always go get Graham Barton and then see if Zach Frazier falls to you as well. And you're not going to do yourself a disservice. CMR is not getting any younger. James Daniels is going to be off contract fairly shortly as well. And at least then, if you have an issue with tackle, because you could go get someone later, at least if you've got Graham Barton, you can keep playing Broderick on the right, and he can go potentially even play a left tackle. But I'm just throwing out some ideas, guys, that the versatility and the value of Graham Barton could mean that he's actually the best opportunity for the Steelers to go get a gun center in this year's first round, especially if Jackson Powers Johnson's off the board early and one of their tackles isn't one of their favorite tackles, is also all their favorite tackles are not available. Anyway, I'm Matty P. As always, go Steelers.